name is Beth Anz. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're talking about pumpkin spice and everything nice. As I mentioned, I am wearing a pumpkin-themed shirt. It is got a skeleton on it. I don't know if you can see, skeleton. And he's very happy. And because it's pumpkin spice season. I have Jack and Jill with me here today. The skeleton's up front. And that is to help us celebrate all things pumpkin spice that came in a little early. This is a preview of them for Halloween. They're going to be telling our spooky stories at Halloween. So come back the week of Halloween on that Sunday to hear some more fun stuff. They wanted me to tell you a couple pumpkin jokes. So really quick, what's the worst thing about pumpkin pie? Does anyone know? When it's all eaten. What did the pumpkin say to the celery? Stop stalking me. And then one final one. Let me find a good one. What did the pumpkin vine say to the little pumpkin? You're starting to grow on me. We'll have more jokes at Halloween, so enjoy. That is your pumpkin-themed jokes for the day. Thank you all for being here. We're going to talk about pumpkin spice. There are a few things more American than pumpkins. Sure, apples and apple pie get a lot of credit for being the all-American dessert, and rightly so. You've heard the stories of Johnny Appleseed, and his real name was John Chapman, who traveled through Ohio and Indiana planting thousands of apples. And the apples, like many Americans, are an immigrant from Europe, first brought over in the 1500s. Like the great American story, it has changed and adapted to our new country over the years. The apple pie did not become a part of our national identity until World War II, when advertisers used it as a symbol of home, love, and warmth for our returning GIs. But this is not a talk about the American identity of apple pie. For as the air cools and pies give way to cider, the pumpkin and pumpkin spice begin as a symbol of the changing seasons, along with the fall leaves and the crisp in the air. And while we don't feel it as profoundly here in Florida, the smells of pumpkin and the traditional pumpkin pie spices of cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, ginger, and sometimes allspice begin to shift our focus to all things fall. Our national obsession with the pumpkin spice latte, which was first introduced by Starbucks about 20 years ago, is a new marker of the changing seasons. Now, I have to admit, I'm not one of the people lining up for this seasonal drink. I'm not against it. I'm just not a coffee person. But I see the national phenomenon that has grown around our favorite seasonal drink. And I see both the joy and the stigma that comes with it. The typical stereotype of the basic white girl, naive, privileged, entitled, and it's rooted in sexism and double standards. The acknowledgement that while pumpkin spice is a seasonal tradition, putting it at about $6 a cup of coffee is a privilege only a few can enjoy. The trope often given to millennials is that they don't make ends meet because they are buying that cup of coffee. And instead of thinking of that, we could choose to recognize the inequality of labor as well as the racist and sexual overtones of calling people lazy while we can't afford that daily cup. But the world is more complex than a simple cable news narrative. So if you love the pumpkin spice latte, drink it. Drink it with joy. And let its warmth fill your heart. Feel your soul and revitalize your mental health. You're allowed to have nice things once in a while. Of course, with all things truly American, if you're really looking at history, it will be messy and it will be uncomfortable. And even in Florida, where we can also talk about uncomfortable narratives. Although the pumpkin spice latte was introduced in 2003, it has pumpkin in the title. It didn't actually have pumpkin in it until 2015. That is because pumpkin spice is the name for the spice itself, this little spice here. It traditionally goes on pumpkin pie. It's not the pumpkin pie itself. But unlike our patriotic apple, let me change that here. Pumpkin is actually native to the Americas. Pumpkin can be found in many areas of the Americas, including Mexico, South America, and the eastern United States, with seeds and shells in the Mayan and Incan caves dating back to 7000 BC. They were smaller, they were harder, and a little more bitter, though Native Americans eventually altered them to be sweeter. They could be dried, they could be preserved, making them indispensable in helping Native Americans survive long and harsh winters. The Poxitawney natives of Chesapeake Bay introduced pilgrims to what they called ice-a-quatter squash, The colonials renamed it poupion after the Greek word for melon. It eventually became essential to life in the colonies, with Governor William Bradford in 1622 ordering the Pilgrims to plant more pumpkin to avoid starvation. One of the Pilgrims shared this rhyme: "If fresh meat be wanting to fill our dish, we have carrots and pumpkins and turnips and fish. We have pumpkins at morning and pumpkins at noon. If it were not for pumpkins, we should be undone." The first explorers of the New World brought pumpkins home with them to Europe, and around the mid-1500s, one of the earliest recipes for pumpkin pie was written by Amelia Simmons in the first ever American cookbook, published in 1796. It used lots of sugars and lots of spices. And as the American story continued into the 19th century, Irish immigrants brought the legend of Jack of the Lantern, which many of you have heard from our Halloween stories. The pumpkin is a melting pot story of many cultures represented in the Americas. Of course, no American or European story is complete without understanding its colonial past. Pumpkin spice, as stated earlier, is a collection of several spices you see on your screen. It is cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, ginger, and sometimes allspice. Pumpkin pie spice is similar to the British and Commonwealth mixed spice and the medieval poudre douce, dating back to the 1390s. Pumpkin pie spice has been mentioned in cookbooks dating to the 1890s. Blended pumpkin spice was introduced commercially by McCormick and Company in 1934, although there is some disagreement. Some say Thompson and Taylor beat them to buy it to at least a year. So let's talk a little bit about these spices and where they came from. Nutmeg, their origin is on the Banda Islands in Indonesia. There in the Dutch East India Company, to obtain nutmeg, carried out one of the first instances of corporate genocide of the native people through enslavement, starvation, and intimidation, eventually forcing a treaty for the spice. Nutmeg at the time was rumored to cure plague, also calm the mind, sharpen the memory, and was considered a beauty regimen. Cloves were found nearby as well on the island of Amboina. They faced a similar horror, resulting in the fights between the Dutch and the English for control. Now, cinnamon is found in Sri Lanka, off the Indian mainland. It was controlled at various times by the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, and in the 1500s, Europeans tried to create spice monopolies through violence, slavery, and indigenous displacement. And finally, allspice. Allspice is native to Mexico, Jamaica, and Central America. It was also brought to Europe through the atrocities of colonization, including Christopher Columbus. Sarah Wasserberg Johnson, a food historian, says, "It is true that if we didn't consume food that hadn't been touched by slavery and indigenous displacement, we wouldn't be eating a lot of food. But whenever foods enter the pop culture lexicon, the way pumpkin spice is in the US, it's important to acknowledge how it reaches us." So now what? We have long now come to the uncomfortable point where we can no longer enjoy our favorite things in the ignorance of a bubble. It's a common problem in the world, as many things are touched by the history of slavery, displacement, and colonization. And pumpkin spice is truly a global collaboration of colonization. But it's okay to hold hard truths in our understanding while appreciating a simple joy of the pumpkin spice latte. But we can go further. We can acknowledge the origins of these ingredients and understand the impacts of colonization on these cultures. We can be more conscious of how the ingredients got to our table and buy more fair trade and equitable companies. We can discuss and we can teach history. We can learn and we can listen to the stories of indigenous and enslaved people. And if we are white, we can recognize our privilege and work for more equitable systems in our food industries, as well as to support the indigenous people of these lands. We can support the rights of workers at coffee chains and other retailers. We can shop locally. We can own locally small-owned businesses and businesses that share our values. We can support unions, and we can organize and help them organize for fair pay, living wages, and better work conditions. We can support local growers and distribution of the all-American pumpkin, and we can support the agricultural workers' rights while we labor for the food on our plate. We can recognize that men and women can both enjoy pumpkin spice lattes and reject the misogyny associated with feminizing beverages. We can support businesses by Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, Latinx, and other people of color. And we can impact the world in big and small ways. We can pay it forward. We can offer to pay for that cup of coffee for someone else. We can spread random acts of kindness, for your simple act may have a profound impact on someone else. We can recognize some of the truths behind the inequalities of pumpkin spice phenomenon, while at the same time speaking out against those who perpetrate harmful misogyny and bullying. So our history is complex, but it's okay to enjoy the basic joy of a pumpkin spice latte. We can learn together to hold the complexities of our American and European histories while working to make our future more equitable. And we can do this one latte at a time. Thank you all.